Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is Rob with Instinct Bassin. In today's video, we're just gonna go over a quick rundown of what you need to look for, just give you some tips when you're going to buy a fish finder here coming up in 2025. Gosh, I can't believe it's already 2025. At the time of this recording, it is the day after Black Friday, so it's still a great time to buy a fish finder. If you're in the market for one, I encourage you to check out the gpsstore.com. They have been our partner for the year and they've helped out the channel a lot. It would do me a big favor if you could go there, check them out. I'll leave a link down below. Again, that's the gpsstore.com. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in this video, I'm not gonna recommend any particular fish finder, any brand name or anything like that. If you've been if you've been a watcher of this channel for a while, you know that I'm partial to the Garmin fish finders and I would usually recommend them. In this video though, I wanna make that your decision and just give you the knowledge that if you're buying a fish finder, say for the first time, what are some things you need to look for? And one of the first things you need to look for is the size of the fish finder, because in fish finders, size is definitely a big factor. Number one, it's gonna be the overall determining factor of how much the unit is gonna cost. Generally, the bigger the fish finder, the higher the price tag it's gonna be. But the bigger the fish finder, the easier it is gonna be on your eyes, and it's gonna be easier to see those certain details that you can. So for instance, I typically recommend, if you're going to use live scope, which you may or may not be familiar with, I think a 10-inch fish finder is probably the minimum size you should get if you plan on using live scope. If you plan on putting the unit at your dash or your console, then you can usually go a little bit smaller. I actually have my bigger unit at the console just because that's the way I prefer it. But again, that's going to be up to you. But size is one of the most important factors that's going to determine how much the fish finder is going to cost. And it's also one of the biggest determining factors in how easy it is going to be able to make out targets on that fish finder itself. And still speaking on size, fish finders can range anywhere between, say, 7 inches. I mean, even on down to 5 if you wanted to put one on a jet ski or something like that. But typically 7 inches all the way up to 22-inch screens that are huge. So they run the gamut in between, and the prices are going to be lower on one end and way higher on the other end. My recommendation when it comes to size is get the biggest unit you can afford at that time. And that's going to be the biggest factor in determining how much budget you're able to spend is going to be the size. And in relation to size, the next biggest factor is probably the resolution of the unit. And typically the higher resolution is going to be a better. But now what do I mean by high? So I've just got some numbers here in front of me. 1024 by 900 is what the UHD2 Garmin 93 SV EchoMap, their newest EchoMap unit. That's what that one is. And then my 106 SV is 1280 by 800. And those are both very good looking units. The Lowrance units, Humminbird units, they're all gonna fall around that range. Some may be higher or lower than others. But that combination of screen size and resolution is something to keep in mind. I would also caution you to keep in mind that just because you can get a bigger fish finder, be sure to check out that resolution as well, because if the resolution isn't increasing as the size of the screen increases, then that's going to cause the image to get fuzzy. I won't get too technical into it, but as that size of the screen increases, you want that resolution to increase as well. So in other words, you wouldn't want to buy a 12-inch unit that has the same resolution as, say, a 9-inch unit, because then it's going to look very blurry on that screen and it'll actually look better on the 9-inch unit. So you want that resolution to increase as the size of the screen increases as well. And then next comes kind of the nitty-gritty of what to look for in terms of what the fish finder should have. Now, I'm coming from a bass fishing perspective. These will be very similar if you fish crappie or offshore as well. Most fish finders nowadays should have these features on them, and so that's what I'm gonna go for. But just realize that I'm coming from a bass fishing kind of tournament or weekend angler, if you will, perspective. So the first thing is gonna be, you wanna have a good GPS mapping system. All of the fish finder brands, and I'm going again by Bass brands, Humminbird, Lowrance, Garmin, they all come with great mapping, typically out of the box. If you've been a fan of this channel, you know I prefer the Garmin ones, but the other ones are great as well. Just realize that when you're looking at mapping, and if you're going to compare mapping, that you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. You don't want to compare a base map of, say, a Garmin base map to a Humminbird Lake Master map, because obviously you're paying a lot more for that Lake Master map and it should be more detailed. So you want to make sure you're comparing base maps to base maps, and you can typically see that at the store, and because that's what's going to usually be loaded on those units as well. But just look at YouTube videos and that type of thing, see which mapping options you like the best. Again, a lot of them, or most of them, all come with great maps out of the box. So that's just the first thing, is the GPS mapping. And then the next thing is going to be just what fish finding features it has in general. All units nowadays are pretty much going to have 2D sonar, which is, you know, the old school orange and blue with the white background. So that's going to be, you know, that's going to be in almost every single unit you have nowadays. It's still useful, but look for that. You also want to have some kind of down view or clear view or down imaging, depending on the brand name. They all use different terms, but it's just basically a narrower cone and a more high resolution method, if you will, of that 2D sonar. And so it's going to, typically in the stores, it's going to be, you know, in that golden black color if it's Humminbird, probably a amber and black color if it's Garmin. So just look for that as well. That's your down scan, your clear view, down view, depending on the brand name again. But that's also going to be included on it. And then also as well, you're going to have the side imaging or side view or side scan, depending on what brand again. But you want to have some method of being able to look to the left and the right from the back of the boat, because that's where the transducer is going to be. So you want that 2D sonar, clear view, side view. And then also any fish finder nowadays, if you're going to want some type of forward-facing sonar, you're going to at least want that capability on the unit. Now, almost always you're going to have to buy another transducer to have that capability, and that transducer is usually going to require a separate, what they call a black box, that usually goes in the rod locker or in some other location. It's basically the processor that, you know, it takes the image from that transducer, processes it, and then puts it to your fish finder. So just make sure that your fish finder, if that's a feature you're going to want to use, which most people do nowadays, just make sure that your fish finder that you're looking for at least has that capability. It doesn't necessarily have to come with it, but at least make sure it has that capability if it's something you want to get in the future. And I should say these aren't necessarily in any order, but of course you're going to want to look at your price and your budget, because if you want a 22-inch fish finder that's, you know, huge, you're going to have a huge budget as well. So just keep those things in mind. Come up with a budget of how much you want to spend, and then my recommendation again will be to get the biggest fish finder you can get based on that budget. And finally, the last thing I'll talk about is just the ease of use, because no matter how great the fish finder is, you need to be able to use it. So just make sure you know how to use the unit, or at least take the time to learn how to use it, because no matter how fancy the unit is, if you don't know how to use it and you can't figure things out, then it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. All right, guys, and that's going to do it for this video. Short and sweet, just some things to look for, tips for buying a fish finder nowadays. Again, it's Black Friday season, holiday season. I encourage you again to check out the gpsstore.com. They've helped us out a lot. Do me a favor, check them out as well. And guys, if you're over 40, guys or girls, be sure to get that colon cancer screening. I keep recommending that. I'm going to keep doing it. If I can just get a couple people to get that screening done, and you know, hopefully we can save a life or two. I've got mine scheduled here coming up, and you know, so just don't neglect that kind of stuff. I appreciate you watching. Thanks so much. Please consider subscribing too. A lot of folks that are watching and not subscribing, I definitely appreciate it if you would like and subscribe the video. Again, this is Rob with Instinct Bass, and trust your gut, and I'll see you on the water.